Next, I ordered. I did not at first bother to look up from the desktop in front of me, where the standard security system were scanning the being in front of me to weapons, pathogens, parasites and other such contraband. I only looked up when the machine flashed a message I had never seen before. Error. Unknown species. It was small. Barely tall enough to see over the top of my custom desk, in fact. A quadrivium biped, 4 limbs ending in 5 manipulating digits. Much of its body was covered in obviously synthetic fabric, with only the 4 paws and head visible. Much of the head, the top around the ears, and down under and around the mouth and nose was covered in short, coarse fur of a brownish hue, apart from where this had been shaved in front of the ear. To accept a cybernetic of some description. My desk registered this as the creature's interspecies communication implant. Though it seemed like a shockingly crude example, it met my surprised stare with the level binocular gaze of a species evolved for predation and the hunt. Small, but powerful and dense seeming, despite its lack of height. It had strapped a pack to its torso that looked larger and heavier than I could have comfortably carried. Abducted 907-42-9653-3 It introduced itself. Name: Kevin Jenkins. Fortunately, the crude cybernetic seemed to be functioning perfectly. And I had no difficulty in understanding the thing's speech, or the subtitle body language that spoke of cocktail of bored resignation and weariness. I had never had to deal with an abductee before, though I had been trained and knew exactly what to do. I closed the booth, stood up, and gestured for the alien to follow me with second right forelimb. I will need to interview you in private, I told him. He picked up a second bag and strolled, while carrying more than I suspected I could physically lift after me. Whatever this thing's was, it was from a high-gravity planet. I know the drill, he said. Pretty sure I'll be leaving this station before long too. Why would that be? I asked politely as I ushered him into the private interview corral and activated the privacy field. The sounds of immigration control evaporated as a sudden fuzzy silence engulfed us. He dropped the bags and they landed with solid, dense noise that told me they were exactly as heavy as they were looked. It's only a matter of time before your colleague in security prosecute me for vagrancy, he said. Why would they do that? I asked, to make conversation as I prepared the official forms. Article 227, paragraph 16 of the Galactic Treaty of Laws. I nodded. The Korgi were small, even smaller than this being gray-skinned, but with large eyes and oversized brain, as a result of a centuries-long eugenics program within their species, which had vastly expanded their intellect. Most other species suspected that their sense atrophied as a side effect of the campaign to make themselves smarter. They were known for abducting specimen of a pre-contact species, experimenting on them to acquire biological data, then using that information to be able to sell cybernetic technologically to the newcomers. That was to their biology the second they were welcomed into the galactic fold. Unethical, but the species as a whole could not be prosecuted for the actions of a few. So the sale end of the implant went ahead anyway. Kevin Jenkins had clearly been one of their victims. I said. Why not have the implant removed and returned to your homeworld? Because I had never been able to keep the secret, and so the Office for the Presentation of Indigenous Species won't let me, he said. Can we please start with the official stuff? I have not slept in too standard dismal. I apologize, I said. Changed at my own lack of professionalism. I activated the corral's recording function. Interview begins. Interstellar Convenience Standard Date Time 11/96/5 to 24/4. Civilian Trade Station 591 Outlook on Forever. Custom and Immigration Officer taking an interviewing immigrant pre-content abductee. Could you repeat your identification for me, please? Abductee, 907-42-9653-3, male. Name: Kevin Jenkins. My species referred to ourselves as human. Our homeworld is a Category 12 template at CO. I interrupted him. I must ask you to take this interview seriously. Your visa will be denied if you continue to mock the immigration system. Its facial features twisted up into the expression of amusement. I assure you, officer, I am not mocking the immigration system. My species' homeworld really is a Category 12 template. You will find documentary verification of that fact on this data storage. I ripped the data from the storage and attached it to the recording. To his word, a full survey of the human homeworld revealed. that it was indeed Category 12, a death world. Hostile, vicious and forever primordial. Experimentally, I tried to enter this fact onto that paperwork with of course threw up an error code. It is considered impossible sentient beings to evolve on Category 12 plants, I said. As I explained off the record, recording to Article 227 Paragraph 16 Galactic Treaty of Laws. I am legally not a sentient being. It raised its forelimbs and the torso joints moved in complicated way, denoting resignation. I gave this some consideration and scrapped the form. He was quite correct, and that status made properly navigating him through the immigration paperwork impossible. This recording just have to do. Jenkins nodded and our implants eventually decided that he meant that a prediction had come true. You can see why the administration on Station 442 kicked me out. He said, I am a bureaucratic anomaly. The whole system is too rigid to accommodate me and mine. I get the impression that Station 442 is not the only place where you. I was interrupted by an alarm. 3 short howls of noise, the attack alarm. Impossible, I explained as I leapt out of my chair. And I registering the motion, the coral shut down our privacy field. The remaining passenger from the shuttle that we had been processing with varying degrees of claimless. Some more skittish species were beating a hasty retreat to the shuttle's airlock, while others waited for instruction. I had not finished gathering my thought when there was a sudden violent lurch that knocked me from my feet. I saw the Jenkins sway with emotion and remain upright. Despite the fact that he was balanced precariously on only 2 legs. A sound alarm began to sound, the long wail of a station damage alarm. This was then followed by the energy growl of a hull breach alarm. But oddly not the decompression alarm. That could mean only one thing. Them. Here. I asked nobody as I struggled to my feet and trotted to the weapons locker. Them. Jenkins asked, lopping along easily next to me in what was clearly much lower gravity than he was involved for. The locker reacted to the security codes. My station security officer's harness was broadcasting and open, spelling out a pair of pulse gun, 2 personal shield emitters, and a magazines of coin-sized nerve jam grenades. I slapped the shield emitters to the power dock on my harness. There was no visible change, but the sense tendrils along my back felt a tingling as the shield came online. The pulse gun configures itself for my species. As I picked it up and connected its power cable to my harness. Hunters. I whispered. Jenkins didn't seem especially frightened by the news. But then I realized he had almost certainly never heard of the only carnivorous species in the galaxy that preferred the meat of fellow sentient. Didn't time to explain. There was the sound of pulse gun fire and a squalling being galloped into the custom area. Before being caught from behind kinetic pulse that hurled it to the around, broken and dying. Jenkins bent head for cover and I followed despite my longer legs. He covered the ground faster and threw himself behind a custom booth as another kinetic pulse missed him. I turned and shot at the hunter that had aimed at us. My shot evaporated harmlessly against a production field identical to mine. There were 3 more behind it. And I ducked into cover next to the human as their return fire threatened to overwhelm my defenses. We were in trouble. I whined all around us. Fleeing and pain-killing immigrant were being smashed to the ground by hunter firepower. Jenkins popped his head above the countertop and ducked again as a volley of shorts targeted him. 6 of them, he said. Ugly motherfuckers. I had to agree as I find a few super sing shorts around the corner. Well, judging any species by the aesthetic value of your own species doesn't make a lot of sense. Hunter were ugly. Their skin was ceramic white and wet, and 7 eyes each breaking independently provided them with exceptional depth perception. On 6 legs, they were extremely stable, and their forelimbs were cybernetically fused into their heavy pulse gun, making disarming them impossible. These ones were wearing full military combat harmless. My own light security harmless was no match. Our only hope was the magazines of nerve jam grenades, which I realized with a falling sensation of failure I had left in the locker. The grenades. I swore, only hope? Jenkins asked. He was holding himself low and hunched. And I could see those dense high-gravity muscle tense and ready under his lightly fused skin. I nodded, fighting back the urge to excrete in my terror. If they took us alive, we would be food by the time. I realized that Jenkins had taken off at a flat sprint towards the locker. He was almost a third of the way there. I knew what I had to do. The hunters were turning to fire at him as I popped up from cover. They saw me coming, but I put 3 rounds into one. And its shield failed, the third had collapsed. What passed for its face shattered by the impact, and I ducked as its follows returned fire. One ignored me and kept firing at Jenkins, but he was so fast, so small, and the rounds amazed into the deck plating around him. He threw his feet out ahead of him and slid the last few strands to the locker. He popped to his feet, looked at me as he raised his arm, and threw accurately and much further than I could have thrown them. Then a pulse round looked him in the torso and flung him against wall. I had no time to mom. I caught the grades, slipped one from the cylindrical container, counted 2 light pulse from the indicator around its edge, and threw it towards the enemy on the third. A second later there was a flare of light and shrinking, but it was not enough. 2 of the hunters rampaged past their consoling comrades, rushing me. I fired, but fear looked my arm, and the best I managed was a single round that impacted harmlessly against a shield. Before their return fire broke my own shielding and ruined my arm. I collapsed shaking from the pain. The hunters trotted round the corner, chattering in their deep guttural language that I couldn't understand. I stared at their twin heavy pulse guns, too afraid even to close my eyes before the end. It didn't come. Instead something black, blue and brown hurtled in the flank of the alien warriors with a crunch and a hiss of pain. It straggled, collided with its comrade and felt. Jenkins, somehow impossibly alive despite tailing a kinetic pulse, round a chest, wrestled very briefly with a hunter, and then there was a horrible organic splitting noise. The hiss became a shriek, and the gun was in hands, blood and mangled meat dripping from the cybernetic interface. The second hunter snapped fire and Jenkins dropped the gun as the shot winged him. He didn't seem to notice. Instead he pounced, and a second shot barely and missed him before his foresaw lashed out, balled up into a haired knot of gravity-desensed bone and flesh which he drove into the hunter's eye cluster. It shrieked and failed, swatting human with its handbills. He didn't appear to care. Instead he caught one of the failing limbs, braked one of his own feet against the hunter's flank. There was a grim tearing noise, and the hunter's leg came away. Its blood sprayed thick and fate though the air, costing yet man from the death world, but he ignored it. He didn't spare the fallen alien and second glance as he charged at the lone survivor. Author's name and the link to original text is in the description. Consider tapping the thumbs up and pressing the subscribe button if you enjoyed this video.